Morning, everyone. I'm Ariana Farina, and I will be giving the regulatory sunscreen update this morning. It is bright and early on the East Coast, and on the West Coast, it's so early that the dew is still on the grass. So this is a regulatory talk, and I know sometimes these can be tedious to some folks, but I'm going to try and make it as lively as possible. I've worn this bright top, and I will do my best to keep it engaging, but bear with me. This is regulatory. We'll do the best we can. Okay, so let's begin the presentation. Okay, wonderful. So this is a sunscreen update, as I mentioned, and yes, it is presented by me. I think before we get into some of the sunscreen regulation updates, I think it's helpful to understand the classification, the regulatory classifications of sunscreens. In the US, sunscreens are classified as drugs, but sunscreens with additional claims that are cosmetic are also considered cosmetics. Additionally, sunscreens are also used in certain cosmetic products for protection of the product, such as protection of the color of the product. These products where the sunscreen ingredient is used in smaller quantities and strictly used for protection of the product are cosmetic products and not drugs. Sunscreen ingredients are also used in certain cosmetic products for functionality as colorants, which we've seen with ingredients such as titanium dioxide. And that last slide was basically a summary of this. This has a few more juicy details in it. This is from the regulation from the FDA website today. A lot of stuff that I'm going to be talking about, pretty much all of it, when I'm talking about the FDA. It's from the FDA website. That's where I pulled that info from. Okay, so I know this is sort of a beast of a paragraph, but I'm going to read it through real quick because I think it kind of gives a little bit of basis of what sunscreens are here in the US. A product that includes the term sunscreen in its labeling or in any other way represents or suggests that it is intended to prevent, cure, treat, or mitigate disease or to affect a structure or function of the body comes within the definition of a drug in section blah, blah, blah of the Act. Sunscreen active ingredients affect the structure or function of the body by absorbing, reflecting, or scattering the harmful burning rays of the sun, thereby altering the normal physiological response to solar radiation. These ingredients can also help to prevent diseases such as sunburn and may reduce the chance of premature aging, skin cancer, and other harmful effects due to the sun when in conjunction with limiting sun exposure and wearing protective clothing. When consumers see the term sunscreen or similar sun protection terminology in the labeling of a product, they expect the product to protect them in some way from the harmful effects of the sun, irrespective of other labeling statements. Consequently, the use of the term sunscreen or similar sun protection terminology in a product's labeling generally causes the product to be subject to the regulation as a drug. However, sunscreen ingredients may also be used in some products for non-therapeutic, non-physiologic uses, such as color additive, which we talked about, or to protect the color of the product. To avoid consumer misunderstanding, if a cosmetic product contains a sunscreen ingredient and uses the term sunscreen or similar sun protection terminology anywhere in its labeling, the term must be qualified by describing the cosmetic benefit provided by the sunscreen ingredient. Okay, so there you have it. Sunscreens are primarily drugs. They can also be combination products of both cosmetics and drugs in the US. Okay, so that's the US classification, but what are some other countries? We're going to briefly go over some other country updates today, so I think it's kind of helpful to get a global perspective on classification. Canada classifies sunscreens as drugs or natural health products. or otherwise known as NHPs, depending upon the active ingredients. Australia classifies sunscreens as therapeutic products or cosmetics. Most of the rest of the world, though, classifies sunscreen as just cosmetics. So EU, the ASEAN countries, Japan, Korea, etc. Okay, from the monograph in the US, here are the uses that are listed for a sunscreen. Helps prevent sunburn, and for products that have an SPF 15 or higher, if used with other sunscreen protection measures, decreases the risk of skin cancer and early skin aging caused by the sun. Okay, so now that we kind of understand how sunscreens are seen from a regulatory perspective in various marketplaces, let's get a little bit deeper into the US regulation for sunscreens. It has been in flux for a while, many years. So I'm going to do my best to give a quick summary of kind of what's happened in recent years, and then we'll move on to what's most current. So there have been updates upon updates to the proposed sunscreen monographs over the years, especially in recent years, as I said. And for instance, there was the Sunscreen Innovation Act. The Sunscreen Innovation Act, or SIA, was enacted on November 26, 2014 to provide an alternative process for the review of safety and effectiveness of non-prescription sunscreen active ingredients. The SIA supplements the FDA's time and extent application, TEA, regulation with new statutory procedures. The SIA also requires FDA to establish timeframes for review of TEAs for OTC drugs other than sunscreen active ingredients. Then we had the CARES Act. This replaces the rulemaking process with administrative order process for issuing, revising, and amending OTC monographs. The CARES Act also provides FDA the authority to assess and collect user fees dedicated to OTC monograph drug activities. So talking a lot about the processes of how sunscreens are approved, how it's done internally, how everything is seen by the FDA. A lot of this makes my head spin, as it might make yours. So you're probably like, okay, this is great, Ariana, but I just want to make sunscreens. So where are we now? And how do I do that? Where do I start? Okay, so the FDA has published a deemed final order for OTC sunscreens and issued a proposed final order for sunscreens in 2021. When finalized, the proposed order will fully replace the deemed final order for OTC sunscreens. The deemed final order is fairly similar to the most recent monograph from 2019. So it's mostly similar, but does have some notable changes. And then there are definitely some notable changes between the proposed final order and the deemed final order. So what are those differences? Okay, so the deemed final order does not impose an upper limit on SPF values, but the proposed order has a maximum labeled SPF of 60 plus and a maximum on the formulated SPF value of a sunscreen of SPF 80. Also, the deemed final order has 16 specified sunscreen active ingredients that are considered GRAS. These were transferred over from the 1999 sunscreen monograph. So it's what we were used to operating with for a while. But the proposed order only grants GRAS status to zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. It also states that aminobenzoic acid and trolamine salicylate sunscreens are not GRAS due to safety issues. Additionally, sinoxate, dioxybenzone, and sulazone, homosalate, moradamate, octinoxate, octisalate, octocrylene, patamate O, suliobenzone, oxybenzone, and avobenzone are not given GRAS status due to inadequate safety data. And if they're not given GRAS status, that would mean once the deemed or the proposed final order is put into place, that all these ingredients would essentially be banned for use as sunscreens, actives except for the zinc oxide and the titanium dioxide. Also, the deemed final order broad spectrum testing is not required and has an optional broad spectrum labeling claim when broad spectrum testing method has been specified or completed. So basically it's optional, and there is a test method that would need to be done to prove it. But the proposed final order for sunscreen with SPF 15 and above claims, they must also pass the broad spectrum testing. So it would become mandatory for any sunscreen that's SPF 15 or higher. Okay. So, you know, there's some interesting changes here. And I think largely notably, the one that folks are looking at is, of course, the fact that it would remove a lot of sunscreen actives. Although the other ones are pertinent too. If you're making high SPF sunscreens, you really need to be aware of that. And you have to be aware that you have to be formulating to be able to meet a broad spectrum claim. So all these things to prepare just in case we wind up with the deemed final order as is. Okay, so here's in this is written in this next portion that I'm presenting here is actually written in an article on the FDA website presenting their position. And this kind of says where they're at with everything. And yes, this is going to make your head spin, but I think it's important information that that it gives here. If at any time sufficient evidence becomes available to answer the outstanding questions about whether a sunscreen containing any of these 8 ingredients is GRAS, FDA plans to proceed to a final order reflecting their conclusion about that ingredient status. However, there is not sufficient data to resolve the questions about each of these ingredients at the end of the proposed order comment period. FDA could consider deferring such action on the GRAS status of the sunscreen ingredients containing the particular ingredients to allow additional time for data to be developed and submitted. This would be the case if the agency has received adequate indication that the party seeking the deferral had made timely and diligent progress to try and obtain the safety information. In addition, if the FDA defers further action regarding sunscreens containing a specific active ingredient, FDA plans to reevaluate the progress of studies periodically. If FDA later decides that the studies are not progressing or otherwise not productive, we expect we would move forward with a final order on sunscreens containing this ingredient. Moving forward to make decisions on the GRAS status for OTC sunscreen products with certain active ingredients, the agency will use the administrative order process and established by CARES Act. The statute gives FDA the authority to use the order process to add, remove, or change conditions for an OTC monograph drug. Okay, so what are they saying here? In summary, basically, the biggest takeaway points here are for active ingredients where GRAS status has not been established yet, the FDA may consider deferring action on these ingredients if sufficient data has not been collected yet to determine GRAS status. But the FDA will regularly reevaluate if the data collection is not progressing fast enough and may move to make the proposed order the final order in the future. Okay, so we don't know where we stand yet. We don't know if these ingredients are going to be approved in the future, but all things to be conscious of in the meantime. Okay, so just going to back up just for a second here. Okay, this is kind of giving the summary over the last few years, where we are now. And now we're going to kind of jump into some very current updates within the last year or so of kind of what's going on, because this is an update on sunscreen regulation. Let's talk about the most current stuff. Okay, this applies to not only sunscreens, but other drugs as well. We have the OTC drug facility user fees due June 1st. Remember, we talked about these a little bit before in the CARES Act. And there are two separate fees that are due, one for a monograph facility and one for a contract manufacturing organization. This is actually the third year that this has been done since the CARES Act was put into place in 2020. So this is the third time these fees will have to be paid. And there has been an increase since last year in the fee. And if you look at the FDA website, you're curious what these fees are based upon. They actually give quite a bit of details on it. There's a whole Q&A section that will tell you why it has increased. And also, if you're wondering, okay, well, what am I? Am I a monograph drug facility? Here's the definition of that, and also a contract manufacturing organization to see if you fall within these categories and have to pay these fees. Okay, nanomaterials in drugs in the US. Okay, again, this is a topic that doesn't only apply to sunscreens, but as you know, sunscreens sometimes can contain nanomaterials. So I think this is important information. There's new draft guidance for the use of nanomaterials in drugs in the US. And I looked at the guidance. It's a little bit over my head technically. It's very scientific, but hopefully have somebody or organization that can understand it if you're making these sunscreens. It talks, and this is a very brief summary, and there's a lot more detail, but it talks about the testing of them. It talks about the characterization of them and the manufacturing of them. And these are guidelines, but hopefully you're able to follow these guidelines. Interestingly, it's sort of a trend, this nanomaterial regulation. We also see in Australia that recently they published info about categorization of chemicals and the nanoscale. So if you're going into Australia, something also to look at. Okay. Also, in very recent years, Key West, the US Virgin Islands, and Hawaii have banned a couple of sunscreen ingredients, which we see listed here. Since then, other states have tried to ban ingredients as well. None have passed yet, but there are also similar bans in Palau, Bonaire, Aruba. What's this all about? These two ingredients, the regulation talks about that there's potential damage to coral reefs, hence why they're banning the use of these ingredients in these states. Also, and this is breaking news really, Maui and the Big Island have actually banned all chemical sunscreen active products, with the exception of products that are actually have a prescription. And this came into effect October 1st, 2022 on Maui, and December 1st, 2022 in the Big Island. So this is very recent. And I can tell you that I saw it firsthand. I was actually in Maui not too long ago. And it's true, you actually you couldn't buy sunscreens except those with titanium dioxide or zinc oxide in them there. And for me, actually, the sunscreen I prefer has a chemical active in it. So I actually had to find a new sunscreen that I like there in Maui. My sister actually used to live there, and she, if she had lived there any longer, she moved, she would have tried to have to go get the prescription sunscreen. But she moved before we could find that out. So I have no idea if anybody's actually successful or, they're actually doing that with the prescription sunscreen there. I guess more information will unfold as this regulation sort of plays out in these places. Okay. Another thing that doesn't just apply to sunscreens, but we have seen in relation to a lot of sunscreens in recent years are product recalls in the US for benzene presence. And we've seen this largely in aerosol sunscreens. And it's thought that it could be contamination in the propellant. So If you are making aerosol sunscreens, that's something you may want to look into. Make sure you're not having benzene presence. Although the folks that have recalled, I believe so far, their products said that they believe that the benzene presence is, they believe it's expected to be in safe quantities, but they're only recalling out of abundant caution for safety. Benzene isn't, we haven't only seen in recalls, but it's in other regulations like Prop 65, et cetera. So something to think about. What else is happening with sunscreen in the US? Okay, so a couple of quick things we're going to go over. A lawsuit, there's a class action lawsuit not too long ago, saying there's a misleading 24-hour SPF protection claim in California. Hold on. The lawsuit alleges that the products in question, which carry statements such as 24-hour foundation with sunscreen, are misbranded because studies have proven SPF protection can be effective for no more than 2 hours after application. Interesting, right? The plaintiff claims that they would have not paid extra for the foundation if they had known it could only provide protection for 2 hours. So stay tuned to see if we get more updates on that. To the next slide. Okay, there we go. Reef-friendly claims. So we just talked about, the ingredients that were banned in certain sunscreens due to, potentially being harmful to reefs. But companies have actually been making reef-safe claims. And it's recently come into question the validity of these claims because of the presence of avobenzone, homosalate, and octocrylene, which the lawsuit alleges are not reef safe. Interestingly, if you look at those, are not the ingredients that are banned in Hawaii or Key West. But apparently there is a disclaimer of Hawaii compliant on the product, no oxybenzone or octinoxate. So I guess we'll see what comes of that. Especially since now a couple places in Hawaii have actually banned more ingredients beyond just those two. Okay. Now we're going to get into a little bit more international stuff. There's actually been a lot of stuff going on in the EU. Titanium dioxide is an ongoing saga. And I'm going to try and, we're getting tighter on time here towards the end, so I'm going to try and go through some of these ingredients just as quick as I can. But the SCCS, they requested an opinion on safety of titanium dioxide in cosmetics. It was received. The EU Court of Justice canceled its CMR classification November of 2022 because before it was listed as CMR. They had listed as CMR, yet the saga continues. France appealed to defend the CMR classification on February 8th, 2023. The cancellation is suspended and the CMR classification remains when the EU Court of Justice makes a final decision in about 2 years. Okay, interesting info. I guess we'll kind of see what rolls out with that. Also, homosalate, there's a modification to Annex 6 because it's already listed in there, but there have been some changes here. You can see it, and you can see the rollout dates that start in 2025. Also, 2 new sunscreen actives have been added to the monograph. So here they are. One is nano, one is not. And the max concentration is 10% for each, or 10% for the combo of 2 of them in one sunscreen product. And methyl anranilate, that has actually been banned in sunscreen products and products intended for use on areas exposed to light. Cannot put these products on the marketplace on August 21st, 2022 or after, and cannot be available on the marketplace on November 1st, 2022 or after. So that came up last year. So if you're still catching up, make sure you're up to date with that. Couple more. Octocrylene, which was already in the monograph, or already, yes, in the, sorry, I'm saying the wrong word, already in the regulation. But now the usage of it has changed a little bit. Here's the new usage information and also the compliancy dates. One already came up in the beginning of 2023, but everything needs to be off the shelf by July 28th, 2023. Also, benzophenone 3, some changes have been made to its usage. And there's a lot of details to this, so I'll let you read through it yourself. But again, that was supposed to, you're not supposed to have put anything else in the marketplace that have the old requirements for the benzophenone 3 as of January 28th, 2023. And then everything has to be off the marketplace by July 28th, 2023. Japan. Okay, interesting. And this has a 2-year grace period from December 1st, 2022, but they'll be using a new water resistance labeling method, and it's a star method based upon ISO 18861. So 1 star means UV water resistance with the water bathing time is 40 minutes, 20 minutes times 2, and the determination method specified by ISO 18861, or the UV water method resistance method of 2 stars when the water bathing time is 80 minutes, 20 minutes times 4 times in the determination method specified in ISO 18861. And on the labeling, the star can either be filled in as you see here, or it can be left empty inside. Okay, so that's it. We have come to our end. Hopefully you learned some new things. Hopefully some of it was a review, but I think from here, we're going to be moving on to a Q&A portion. Thanks so much for sitting with me. Questions, comments, if you get your questions answered in the next 10 minutes, great. But if not, here's my email. Thanks, everybody. Bear with me just one more second. My screen is frozen.